From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. New York Times reports London is hiding the world's stolen money. According to a new study, climate change is already impacting 85% of humanity. A Dalit man beaten to death in northern India. Imran Khan urges US to not push Afghanistan towards becoming haven for terrorists again. Viral TikTok shows white Baptist church member dressing up as Muslim for Halloween. And our top story tonight. The New York Times reports that the City of London is hiding the world's stolen money. The Pandora Papers exposed secretive and questionable financial dealings by over 300 politicians and public figures from more than 90 countries and territories. Amongst those exposed were more than 130 billionaires from Russia, the United States, and elsewhere. An estimated $6 to $36 trillion of their wealth is held in tax havens. The Tax Justice Network's Financial Secrecy Index is a ranking of tax havens. It shows Britain and its spider web of offshore satellites would rank at the top. More than two-thirds of the 956 companies that the Pandora Papers link to public officials were set up in British Virgin Islands. London plays a key part through international stock market listings, currency trading, bond issuance, and by handling financial activity from around the world. It is also the nerve center of the darker global offshore system that hides and guards the world's stolen wealth. Climate change could already be affecting 85% of the world's population, according to an analysis of tens and thousands of scientific studies. A team of researchers used machine learning to comb through vast troves of research published between 1951 and 2018. They found 100,000 papers potentially documenting evidence of climate change's effects on the Earth's systems. Study author Max Callahan told AFP that there was a huge amount of evidence showing the ways in which climate change is affecting all continents. Callahan and teams from the Mercator Research Institute and Climate Analytics in Berlin found that 80% of the globe had generated impact studies that matched predictions for weather changes due to global warming. But the research has disproportionately documented climate impacts in richer nations, with fewer studies in highly vulnerable regions. The CIA recently announced a new China-focused unit that underscores its views of Beijing being United States' toughest long-term adversary. CIA Director William Burns said that the new China Mission Center will address the challenge China poses to the spy agency's mission. It represents a broader shift in President Joe Biden's administration towards confronting China as its leading strategic competitor. In June, President Biden announced a new Pentagon task force to assess and respond to Beijing's military challenge. The CIA and FBI have unearthed dozens of cases of China recruiting U.S. citizens to supply classified or corporate proprietary information. It has also found Chinese citizens working in the U.S. as intelligence collectors. A social media video of men pinning down a Dalit man in northern India and beating him to death with sticks is causing outrage. The video, which was shared by the attackers, showed one of the men pressing his knee on the man's neck as others thrashed him. Local police said the incident occurred on October 7th. The man was identified as Jagdish Megwal from Prempura village. The perpetrators dumped Megwal's body in front of his house, according to a complaint filed by his father. His relatives and neighbors staged a protest seeking justice. Police have filed charges of kidnapping and murder against 11 suspects and are searching for others still at large. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan warned Monday that sanctioning the Taliban government would help strengthen Daesh in Afghanistan. Khan also said that the Taliban are in the best position to get rid of the terrorist group. In an interview with UK-based online news outlet Middle East Eye, Khan urged the United States to not push Afghanistan towards becoming a haven for terrorists again. He said that the world must engage with Afghanistan because hardliners within the Taliban movement could easily revert to the Taliban of 20 years ago. Khan said terrorist attacks inside his country have decreased since the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Iraqi Shia cleric Muqtada as-Sadr's party won the most seats in last week's early parliamentary elections, initial results showed on Monday. Sadr's bloc won 73 seats in the 329-member Iraqi parliament. The Taqaddum bloc won 38 seats, according to results cited by the Iraqi news agency. The State of Law bloc, led by former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, came out third with 37 seats. Sadr's bloc seeks to secure enough seats in parliament to form a government. Sadr sent a message to the US Embassy in Baghdad, where there have been repeated rocket attacks for months. He said all embassies are welcome unless they interfere in Iraqi affairs. Germany's largest mosque will be allowed to broadcast the Islamic call to prayer over loudspeakers on Friday afternoons. A 2-year deal between the city of Cologne and the Muslim community was announced on Monday. All 35 city mosques will be permitted to broadcast the call to prayer for up to 5 minutes on Friday between noon and 3 p.m. This includes the Cologne Central Mosque, which opened in 2018. The mosque became a flashpoint for anti-Muslim sentiment from far-right parties after an influx of asylum seekers arrived in Germany in 2015. The Friday call to prayer now joins the bells of Cologne's cathedral, Northern Europe's largest Gothic church, as amongst the city's sounds. Greenpeace activists put up an oil-spattered statue of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson outside Downing Street on Monday. The environmental group is urging Johnson to block the proposed development of a new oil field off the Scottish coast. The UK government is expected to approve the development of the Cambo oil field off the Shetland Islands, despite oppositions from environmentalists. Greenpeace warned oil extracted from Cambo would produce emissions equivalent to up to 18 coal plants running for a year. Cambo oil fields contain more than 800 million barrels of oil, of which 170 million to be extracted in the first phase. Britain has committed to become carbon neutral by 2050. It's hosting the COP26 Climate Change Summit in Glasgow next month. Christopher Columbus's fear and hatred of Islam caused him to cross the Atlantic to circumvent Muslim lands for trade, according to an editorial by Alan Mikhail. Mikhail is the chair of the history department at Yale University who specializes in Ottoman history. He said at heart, Columbus was a crusader. In his piece published in the Los Angeles Times yesterday, Mikhail said that Columbus, in his encounters with and battles against Muslims, felt the burden of holy war deep in his soul. The professor also wrote that the imagery used by Columbus to describe indigenous people of the Americas was the same as that used for Muslims. Thousands of Native Americans and environmentalists gathered at a rally near the White House Monday for Indigenous Peoples Day in Washington, D.C. Protesters led by indigenous activists demonstrated to demand President Joe Biden stop approving fossil fuel projects and declare the climate crisis a national emergency. Monday's demonstrations fell on the federal Columbus Day holiday, which is now also recognized as Indigenous Peoples Day. Yesterday's rally marked the start of 5 days of demonstrations calling for greater attention to climate injustices. These are part of the People versus Fossil Fuel protests, which have been organized by a coalition of groups. They are urging the Biden administration to take action to reduce carbon-producing fossil fuel projects. At yesterday's protest, many indigenous people, including elders, were arrested for civil disobedience. Law enforcement officers also used an LRAD, or long-range acoustic device. This uses an extremely high decibel for crowd control. Metropolitan Police also used an LRAD at the 2017 Women's March. They did not use it on January 6th at the Capitol. Police in Dayton, Ohio have released body camera footage showing officers dragging a partially paralyzed man out of his car by his hair. Officers repeatedly asked Clifford Owensby to exit the vehicle during the September 30th traffic stop. The 39-year-old can be heard telling them he's a paraplegic and could not do so, the video shows. The video shows Owensby telling officers he does not want to be touched. He then called someone to come to the scene and witness what is going on. Owensby is then dragged out of the car by officers who appear to pull him out by his hair and handcuff him on the ground. Police are seen hauling him into a police cruiser. A TikTok video of a white member of the New Life Baptist Church dressed up as a Muslim for Halloween is sparking outrage. TikToker Brooke posted a video on Sunday which has garnered more than 200,000 views and over 29,000 likes and counting. It shows a man dressed in a keffiyeh and a white imam's robe while working at the church's booth in Independence, Kansas. The event appears to be a Halloween festival. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay? I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the issue of femicide and violence against women, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. We have today Reem As-Salem, who is United Nations Special Rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences. And tell us this, why is the violence against women increasing because they are being more coming into position of power in different societies, so there is a violence increasing against them, or some other causes?
Yes, thank you for having me. And it's a very good question. So I would propose that we first look at the definition of gender-based violence, which, as you may know, is violence that is directed against a woman or a girl because of their gender, or because the violence against them affects them disproportionately. And as you rightly mentioned, violence against women remains a global epidemic. And in fact, it's further made worse by intersecting forms of violence and intersecting forms of discrimination that women are subjected to. So what that actually means is that if you take a woman and if she has a number of other characteristics that intersect with her identity as a woman and a girl, she would be even more exposed to violence and more vulnerable to it. So, for example, if you have a woman that speaks out against patriarchal norms or challenges them, for example, if you have a human rights defender, she could be a judge, she could be a leader of a women organization. So a woman or a girl that uses her voice or uses a platform in order to challenge social norms or challenge human rights violations, this kind of woman is more exposed to violence.
So if you speak up, if you are contributing to the society, you become more susceptible. Tell me if the statistics collection also playing a role in we seeing higher level of violence, or it is essentially the causes of women rising as a contributor to the society in a difficult conditions?
Well, it's a combination of both, and there is no doubt that in the last 10 years or so, there is more awareness, more reporting happening on violence, and there are more resources being dedicated to it. And this is obviously the result of the efforts of many stakeholders. I mentioned women-led organizations, civil society in general, human rights defenders, but also, countries that have feminist policies and UN agencies. And of course, my position, the mandate as a special rapporteur, which was created more than 27 years ago, has also allowed for increasing advocacy and dedicated work in order to really find out the scope and the level of this horrendous phenomena. But despite all, let's say, the advances that have been made in order to understand the scale of the problems, what is also clear is that still a lot remains to be done, that there's still insufficient data being collected, insufficient monitoring by states happening, especially by the statistical offices and institutions that are charged with monitoring gender-related crimes. And if I may say, unfortunately, also the COVID situation has not helped that at all. So we had a pandemic, a violence against women and girls pandemic before COVID. COVID came and made it worse in so many ways, because women became also exposed to more violence, domestic forms of violence since COVID. And COVID has also made it harder to collect data, harder for women and girls to access services. And that's actually a problem, because we're supposed to learn lessons on how a disaster or a pandemic as big as COVID affects the situation of women and girls and affects the dynamics of violence, because this is not going to be the first nor the last pandemic, unfortunately, or large-scale global situation that we're going to be confronted with. So I'm afraid we haven't learned those lessons. We don't know the scale yet, and we should be learning those lessons.
So, Rima Salem, you seems to be suggesting that situation might be worse than what it looks in these statistics, because during the COVID, divorces went up, fighting went up, and you're saying violence went up. Because of the COVID, collection of information also went down. So are you suggesting that the real picture may be far worse?
My office did ask different governments to send in data, and some of them did. As you may know, my predecessor presented a report on the link between violence against women and COVID. And the picture was very varied. So in some countries, it seems that the violence went down. In others, it went up. But it doesn't give us really a very accurate picture, because all these countries have had challenges, obviously, in data collection.
So tell us, is the nature of violence different in different countries? There is a big news which comes out when violence happens, say, in Turkey or in different places. It is called the honor killing. Mm-hmm. Who are doing the honor killing? It is essentially husband and the boyfriend and all that. But the same thing happened in the United States. 92%, according to FBI data, in 2018, the killers were boys and husbands. Sorry, not the boys, but boyfriends and the former husbands, or the current husband or the current boyfriends. There is a big case right now in America. Mm-hmm. A girl has been killed, and we don't know who, and boyfriend has disappeared. Yeah. The title is different. So share with us, is the nature of femicide in America different than the nature of femicide, say, in Egypt?
Yes, that's also a very good question. What we see is that violence is not restricted to one region in the world or one country. It's global, and it is on epidemic scales, as I said. And what we see also is that there are commonalities in the causes of violence, which really comes down to mainly patriarchal norms, toxic masculinity, and other factors. They collectively proliferate and result in violence. But perhaps more than any other time in the past, what we're seeing now is also that it's easier sort of to instigate violence against women, to encourage it, to aid and abet it, to finance it. And that's obviously because of the very widespread use of the internet and social media. So you can be sitting in one country and instigating violence against women or a woman in another country. And it's harder, let's say, to catch you, to hold you accountable. And of course, states have a duty to protect the rights of women and girls, to protect the rights to privacy, to freedom of expression, to confidentiality, and obviously to live a life free from violence. But of course, the whole issue of the laws and how they function also across borders is still something that isn't fully developed. But it is important to emphasize that human rights outside the internet apply to the internet. So it's not like we live in parallel worlds where the internet is protected against that. Now, perhaps also to say that what affects the landscape of violence in a country is also political will. So the degree to which a state is willing to invest resources in combating and ending violence, also the degree to which it's willing to adapt and reform its legislations and policies to make sure that violence is really prevented, acts of violence are investigated, that they are punished. And so it has to do really also with the rule of law in a country, I would say. And that point is very important because courts and judicial systems are obviously the gateway for protecting the rights of women and girls and other groups. And they've been won with difficulty in some countries. And of course, those that are pushing back against women's rights and girls' rights know that. And so what we're seeing in some countries is that they are obviously targeting immediately the judicial systems, trying to influence them, trying to control them. And it's very concerning because we see that even in democracies or supposedly democracies, where legal systems, where there are attempts to co-opt legal systems in order to control women and control girls and allow for violence against them.
Well, we got a democratic place called Texas. It has the largest number of women killed every year because, you can have a gun everywhere. You can walk with guns, enter with guns. So they're using their guns. And the largest number of women killed in America actually is in the state of Texas. Tell us what international institutions you're impressed by that they're doing a good job in preventing violence against women.
Yeah, so there's obviously many stakeholders in many different parts of the world that are working on ending violence against women and girls and are stepping up to that challenge. Perhaps I should say that it's not the role of any one single institution or collection of institutions to do that. It really has to be an all-of-society approach. We're all concerned by that. We all have a role to play. And so the thing I would also say here is that the impact of violence against women and girls is not just on the survivors and their families. It goes beyond that. It affects also the prosperity of countries and nations. So the entire countries and nations. And that's why it's not a coincidence, in fact, that the 2030 agenda specifically speaks to that. So, for example, the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 calls on achieving gender equality and calls on achieving the empowerment of women. So it asks states to do that. And also SDG number 5, ask states or states commit through it to ending all forms of violence against women.
There are all sorts of societies. You mentioned societies, democratic societies with laws. And I mentioned Texas, which got, guns and laws about guns, and women are being killed as largest number in the United States. But then there are traditional societies where law has not penetrated, like India. In rural areas, you can walk village to village, and you will not find any police officer. So law is something which belongs to the city, and there's nothing anybody can do. And local people, based on their value system, they sit down and they pass decision on women and women's body and what they can. So in the traditional societies, which are not governed by laws, although theoretically democratic, how can women be protected in those scenarios?
So rural women and the violence that happens against them is actually a very good example of what I talked about earlier, these cumulative forms of discrimination and also the intersecting characteristics that can then exacerbate violence. And by that, I mean that they are more vulnerable, not only because they're women in a certain context, but also because they might be in the rural areas. And this is actually one of the reasons, like recognizing this vulnerability and the special need that needs to be put to rural women is a reason why, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women specifically called on states to eliminate discrimination against women in rural areas and asked states that they ensure that women in rural areas enjoyed adequate standards of living. And so what we see in a number of countries is that, for example, rural women or women who live in rural areas that are also human rights defenders or they might be community leaders that are advocating for their communities to access land or to reform laws or access other rights like education for their children, are often threatened or in some contexts and can also be subjected to extrajudicial killings. And then, of course, you have the other issue, which is that women in rural areas are often disadvantaged when it comes to accessing also services and very vital services, like, for example, sexual and reproductive health, like abortion services. And this is very much present or an issue in the global north as it is in the global south. And you actually spoke about the US, so I'll give you an example from the US. So, for example, in Rio Grande Valley, 2 abortion clinics serve an area which has 1.3 million people. So women have to travel 250 miles each way, which is equivalent to 4 hours by car, to access the nearest clinic in San Antonio in Texas. And many, of course, are unable to afford the transportation costs, especially if they're immigrant women living in rural areas and if they are poor. And also they cannot afford the cost of abortion services. So what I would say is that states also here have a duty to ensure that these women can access their rights, that they sanction, that they prohibit violence against these women, and also to ensure that these women can access justice effectively and also have effective remedies. And of course, to do that, you need to make a very concerted effort to inform women about their rights and not just assume that they know it.
Well, since you're talking about informing them, what about education? Can we do a better job in raising a generation which is more respectful to each other's space across gender and open to making all the facilities available to them and are better able to control their anger or the, control freakishness of a male domination?
Well, I would call it more than freakiness. It's a very serious problem. I would call it toxic masculinity, being influenced by patriarchal norms. And the issue, of course, of education is very important since, of course, as I said, social norms are one of the causes of violence. And I would say that educating all, not just boys, let's say, or men, about the rights of women and girls, about things like patriarchal norms, influence of toxic masculinity, is something that should permeate the education system and not just start, for example, in high school, but should really start very young. And by the way, it would be wrong to reduce that to, let's say, something that affects only women. Yeah, it's not a situation that comes about because of the difference between the sexes. It's because of gender-related issues. So, in fact, some men can even suffer from these patriarchal norms and this toxic masculinity. Like, for example, transgender men. Women can also, because of these patriarchal norms, unleash violence against other women. So it's not an issue of men versus women. And I would say that, of course, we have to, impart the human rights based approaches in the education system, and we have to remember that actually, because of gender-based violence, it's often women and girls who also suffer in accessing education. I don't think I need to say very much about now what we see in Afghanistan and the problem that women and girls are having in enjoying education in universities and in schools. But also, for example, girls that have to or undergo child marriage, often the first right that goes out of the window is their ability to go to school. So therefore they lose out on school as well. Now, the final thing maybe I say about education is that education on its own will not solve the problem. As I said before, it really has to be a comprehensive package of intervention, and it has to include the whole society.
So tell us, in your role, Rima Salem, at the United Nations, being a special rapporteur on these issues, what will you be able to do in this area? And is it well-funded? If you need a comprehensive solution and approach, it requires substantial amount of funding to focus on that. So what do you exactly will be doing in this role?
So my role is a very specific role, and let me maybe speak a little bit to it because I understand there can be confusion about what it does or doesn't do. So in 1994, the then Commission on Human Rights actually established this position through a resolution. And since 2006, the mandate holder then reports to what is now the Human Rights Council. And the rapporteur position was basically, was established because of the scale of violence against women, because there was a need to look at its causes and consequences. And what the mandate holder is meant to do is to receive and seek information on the situation from all kinds of stakeholders. So we're talking about governments, we're talking about treaty bodies like CEDAW, for example, the CEDAW Committee, specialized agencies, and also it's meant to recommend measures, ways, and means at local, international, regional level to eliminate violence against women. So what I'm supposed to also be doing is to be working with my colleagues in the special procedure that also, of course, when they work on their themes, are always looking also at the situation of women and girls. It's an issue that is mainstreamed in the reports and the activities actually of other special rapporteurs. There's also a working group and other special procedures on discrimination against women and girls. I work very closely with them. And I'm trying to also, as part of my tenure, to strengthen relationships with actually all stakeholders that are prioritizing this. So also UN agencies that work on this issue, like UN Women, like obviously UNHCR in the situation of forced displacement and refugees. So I'm trying also to leverage these synergies because this objective of ending violence against women is actually too big for just one person or one entity. So we have to collectively make that effort.
Well, thank you so much, Reem Salem. I appreciate you being with us. Assalamu alaikum. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Ms. As-Salem. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.